I stared at the divorce papers one more time, my signature already bleeding across the bottom in blue ink. The notary had already stamped them. The whole thing took 15 minutes. 15 minutes to sign away everything I'd built over the past 12 years. That was 6 months ago. 6 months, and I'm only now understanding what I actually did. My name is Jennifer, and I need to tell you about the biggest mistake I've ever made. Not the marriage itself. No, that part was real, even if it ended badly. The mistake was thinking I was protecting myself when I was actually walking straight into a trap that Marcus had laid out with the precision of a man who'd been planning his escape for years. I just didn't see it coming until it was too late. Let me take you back to when things still made sense. 3 years before the divorce, I was living what I thought was the dream. Marcus and I had bought this gorgeous 4-bedroom colonial in Westchester County, the kind of house you see in magazines. Cream-colored shutters, a wraparound porch, 2 acres of manicured lawn that cost us a fortune to maintain. The mortgage was steep, but Marcus's consulting job paid well, and I was making decent money myself as a marketing director at a tech firm in the city. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. Solidly upper middle class, the kind of couple that other people looked at and thought, yeah, they've got it figured out. I remember the day we moved in like it was yesterday. It was June, bright and hot, and Marcus was walking through the empty rooms like a kid on Christmas morning. He stopped in the master bedroom, pulled me close, and said, "This is it, Jenny. This is our place. This is where we build everything." I believed him completely. Our life had a rhythm to it. Wake up at 6:30, coffee while scrolling through emails. Marcus would head to the train station by 7:15. I'd usually leave by 8. We'd text throughout the day, sometimes work stuff, sometimes just thinking of you messages. Friday nights were ours. We'd order from Marcello's, open a bottle of something decent, and sit on the porch watching the neighborhood wind down. We had friends over sometimes. My best friend Linda and her husband Todd would come over, or we'd do the suburban dinner party thing with the neighbors. Marcus was charming at those events, the kind of guy who could talk to anyone about anything. He'd tell stories about his consulting work, make people laugh, ask just the right questions to make you feel heard. My mom adored him. When she'd call, which was often, probably 3 times a week, she'd ask about him before she asked about me. "How's Marcus? Is he working too hard? Tell him to take better care of himself." My dad had passed when I was 28, so Marcus had somehow become the male figure she relied on. Everything looked perfect from the outside, and honestly, a lot of it felt perfect from the inside too, but there were things I didn't pay enough attention to. Red flags I rationalized away because the rest of the picture was so nice. Like the fact that Marcus kept his laptop locked. Not a password lock, that would have been normal, but he'd literally close it and turn it away from me if I walked into his home office while he was working. If I asked what he was doing, he'd say, "Client confidentiality stuff," in a way that made me feel like I was being nosy, or the way he started working late more and more. "Consulting," he'd say, "big project, the kind of thing that requires late nights and weekend calls." I'd be asleep by the time he came to bed, and he'd be gone before I woke up. And his phone, God, his phone. He never, ever left it on the counter. It was always in his pocket, always face down, always locked. I mentioned some of this to Linda once, maybe 2 years into the marriage. We were at Starbucks, and I'd brought up how Marcus had been distant lately. "He's probably just stressed about work," she said, stirring her caramel macchiato. "Todd gets like that sometimes. Men compartmentalize differently than we do." I accepted that explanation because it was easier than examining why I felt a little sick every time Marcus's phone buzzed, and he'd glance at it without showing me who it was. At night, sometimes, I'd lie awake next to him and think about how strange it was that someone you sleep next to could still feel like a mystery. But then morning would come, and he'd kiss me on the forehead while I was still half asleep, and I'd push the weird feeling down. I was good at pushing feelings down back then. The turning point, or maybe the first real warning sign, came on a Tuesday in March. I was working from home that day because I had a migraine, the kind where the light feels like needles and you just want to exist in darkness and silence. Marcus had a big presentation that afternoon with a potential new client. He'd mentioned it that morning before he left, said he might be late getting home, that we shouldn't plan on dinner together. Around 4 o'clock, I heard his car pull into the driveway. That was weird. His presentation was supposed to go until at least 6. I was confused, but also, he was home early, and maybe he could help me with the kids' dinner. We had 2 by then. Emma was 9 and Luke was 6. I came downstairs, squinting against the light, and found Marcus standing in the kitchen on his phone. He saw me and his entire body went rigid. Not like he was startled, like he was caught. "I'll call you back," he said quickly into the phone, and he hung up. "Hey," I said carefully. "Thought you had the presentation." "It got pushed to tomorrow," he said. But he didn't look at me when he said it. He was looking at his phone, which had just buzzed. "Oh, well, that's good. You can help me with the kids." "Actually, I need to go back out. Client called, emergency meeting. I have to head back into the city." He was already moving toward the living room, already grabbing his keys off the hook. "Now? But you just got home." "I know, I'm sorry." He finally looked at me, and his expression was something I couldn't quite read. Frustration? Annoyance? "It's a big account, Jen. I can't say no to this." He was out the door before I could respond. I stood in the kitchen listening to his car back out of the driveway, and I felt this cold flutter in my chest that I couldn't quite name. That was the first time I really, truly wondered if something was wrong. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed next to Marcus, listening to him breathe, and I felt like I was sleeping next to a stranger. By the time morning came, I'd convinced myself I was being paranoid. He'd been stressed. The presentation got rescheduled. It made sense. Except it didn't. Not really. Over the next few months, the pattern got worse. Late nights became the norm. Weekends, he'd disappear for client dinners or emergency conference calls. His phone stayed locked, his laptop stayed closed, and the distance between us grew into something I could almost touch. I started paying attention to things I'd ignored before. The credit card statements that came to his office, not our joint account. The way he'd suddenly leave the room if I walked in while he was texting. The burner phone I found in his car once. A cheap Android thing that he claimed was for work stuff, keeping it separate. I didn't confront him about it. That's the part that still makes me feel sick. I found evidence of something wrong, and instead of asking him directly, I swallowed it down. I told myself I was being crazy. I told myself that marriages have rough patches. I told myself that if I didn't acknowledge the problem, maybe it would go away. Linda noticed something was off when we met for coffee in October. Emma and Luke were both in school by then, and I'd carved out Tuesday mornings as my time, just a couple hours to myself before the chaos of afternoon pickup and homework and dinner. "You look exhausted," she said, stirring her latte. Like actually exhausted, not just the usual mom thing. I almost told her everything. I had the words right there on my tongue, but instead I smiled and said, "Just work stress. We're doing a big rebrand and it's killing me." It was a lie, and I think she knew it, but she didn't push. That was Linda. She knew when to let you keep your secrets. By November, I started seeing a therapist. Not because I thought Marcus was cheating. I told myself it was just about communication. We weren't talking like we used to. We needed to reconnect. Maybe a professional could help us figure out how to be close again. Dr. Reeves was a woman in her 60s, with gray hair and the kind of office that smelled like lavender and old books. I sat across from her every Thursday at 4 o'clock, and I talked about how distant Marcus had become, how we'd drifted, how I felt like he was keeping parts of himself from me. "Have you asked him about this?" she asked me once. "Not directly," I admitted. "Why not?" I didn't have a good answer. Because I was afraid of what he'd say? Because part of me didn't want to know? Because it felt safer to live in uncertainty than to face a concrete truth? "I guess I'm scared," I finally said. Dr. Reeves nodded like that made perfect sense. "Of what?" "That if I ask, he'll tell me something that breaks us." She didn't tell me I was being ridiculous. She didn't offer me false reassurance. She just said, "Then you have to decide what you're more afraid of, the truth or never knowing." That question sat with me for weeks. Christmas came. We did the whole suburban thing, the tree, the decorations, the cards we sent to relatives. My mom came to stay with us for a week, and Marcus was the perfect son-in-law. He made her favorite eggnog. He helped her decorate the hallway. He drove her to the store to pick up ingredients for her famous apple pie. Watching him with her, I almost forgot to be suspicious. He was so warm with her, so present, so genuinely interested in what she was saying. How could a man who was lying to me be so authentic with my mother? But then she'd leave the room, and something would shift in his face, like he was putting on a mask and then taking it off, like there was a performance and a reality, and I was watching both happen at once. The breaking point came on December 28th. Emma had a soccer tournament that Saturday. Luke was at a birthday party. Marcus had said he was going to the gym in the morning. Then he'd meet us at the tournament. I didn't think anything of it. I'd been so deep in denial by then that I barely noticed when he was gone anymore. I was sitting in the bleachers with Linda watching Emma's team play when I got a text from an unknown number. It said, "Tell your husband I'm done waiting. If he doesn't leave her, I'm going to." My hands went cold. The phone felt heavy. Linda was saying something about Emma's footwork, but I couldn't hear her. All I could hear was a ringing sound in my ears. I showed her the text without saying anything. She read it once. Then she read it again. Then she looked at me. "Oh my God, Jenny," she whispered. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I just sat there watching my daughter run across a field while my entire life collapsed around me. Marcus showed up to the tournament 20 minutes later, acting completely normal. He sat down next to me, kissed my cheek, asked who was winning. I couldn't even look at him. I felt like if I turned my head, I might throw up. "I need to talk to you," I said quietly. "Tonight, after the kids are asleep." Something flashed across his face. Fear? Guilt? It was there and gone so fast I couldn't be sure. "About what?" he asked carefully. "Just tonight," I said. We didn't speak for the rest of the tournament. When we got home, I put the kids to bed, took a shower, and sat on the edge of the bed waiting for him to come upstairs. I was shaking. My mouth was dry. I kept rehearsing what I was going to say, and every version of it sounded wrong. He came in around 9. He was still in his gym clothes. "So," he said, sitting on the far edge of the bed, "what's going on?" I pulled out my phone and showed him the text. I watched his face change. Not in the way I expected. Not shock or denial or even anger. It was something colder. Something like acceptance. Like he'd been waiting for this moment. "I can explain," he said. "There's a woman," I said. It wasn't a question. "Jenny. There's a woman and she's threatening to tell me about you. How long, Marcus? How long has this been going on?" He ran his hand through his hair. He looked tired. Actually tired. Not the fake tired of someone carrying a small secret. This was the exhaustion of someone carrying a massive lie. 3 years, he said. 3 years. Since before we bought the house. Since before he told me this was where we'd build everything. 3 years of him touching me, kissing me, telling me he loved me, while he had someone else waiting in the wings. I stood up. I couldn't sit next to him anymore. "Why?" I asked. "Why would you do this?" "Because I wasn't happy," he said. "I haven't been happy in a long time." "Then why didn't you just leave? Why did you stay and lie?" He didn't answer. He just sat there, looking at his hands like they belonged to someone else. "I want you to leave," I said. "Tomorrow. I don't care where you go, but I want you out of this house." "Jenny, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. I can fix this. We can go to couples therapy. We can—" "No," I said. My voice was steady now, and that scared me more than the shaking had. "You don't get to fix this. You don't get to do the work and make yourself feel better about what you did. You lied to me for 3 years. You looked me in the eye every single day and lied. So you're going to leave, and we're going to get a divorce, and you're going to figure out your life without me in it." He left the next morning. I watched him pack a suitcase, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, just a hollow, echoing emptiness. That's when I made the first call, to a lawyer. Her name was Patricia Chen, and she came highly recommended by one of my coworkers. I sat across from her in her office on Madison Avenue, and I told her everything. The affair, the 3 years, the text from the other woman. Patricia listened without interrupting. When I was done, she leaned back in her chair and said, "Okay, here's what we're going to do." She was calm and methodical. She laid out the process. We'd file for divorce on grounds of infidelity. We'd go for full custody of the kids. We'd protect the house. We'd get him for alimony and child support. He cheated, she said. That gives us leverage. He's not going to want this to get ugly. He'll want to settle quickly and quietly. I believed her. I believed that because he'd done something wrong, the system would protect me. I believed that infidelity mattered. I believed that the law was on my side. I was so wrong. It took 6 weeks for Marcus to agree to meet with lawyers and discuss the terms. 6 weeks during which he stayed in a corporate housing apartment in the city. 6 weeks during which I told Emma and Luke that Daddy was going to be living somewhere else for a while, and I watched their little faces process something they shouldn't have had to process. When we finally sat down with both lawyers present, Marcus came in looking like a man who'd made peace with something. He was calm, almost serene. His lawyer was a man named David Rothstein, and he had the kind of confidence that comes from knowing something I didn't. My client is willing to be very reasonable about this, David said. He wants to minimize the disruption to the children. He's prepared to offer the following terms. I thought he was going to offer me the house, the kids, most of his retirement. That's what Patricia had said would happen. Instead, he offered me nothing. Mr. Marcus proposes that Mrs. Jennifer retain primary custody of the children, David said, reading from a paper like he was reading a grocery list. He proposes that the house be sold and the proceeds split 50-50. He proposes that retirement accounts be split 50-50. He proposes that child support be calculated based on current income guidelines. Current income, Patricia said sharply. His current income is 0, David interrupted. My client resigned from his position at the consulting firm 2 months ago. He's currently unemployed and living on savings. My stomach dropped. He also proposes that Mrs. Jennifer agree to a no-fault divorce, David continued, and that in exchange for her agreement to that, he will not contest custody or pursue spousal support. Patricia's hand found mine under the table and squeezed. A warning, a sign that something had just gone very wrong. We need a recess, she said. In the hallway, she explained it to me. By resigning before the divorce was filed, Marcus had essentially erased his income from the calculation. Child support would be based on what he was making now, which was nothing. And by offering me the house, he was actually offering me a liability. The mortgage was still $300,000. I couldn't afford to keep it on my own. This is a setup, Patricia said. He planned this. He knew you were going to file for divorce, and he set himself up to have nothing to take. But he has savings, I said. He has savings that he can hide or claim he doesn't have, savings that won't show up on his tax returns. Without employment income or documented assets, we can't touch any of it. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. What do I do? I asked. Patricia looked at me with something like pity. You decide if you want to fight him on this and spend $50,000 in legal fees, or if you want to settle and minimize the damage. I chose to minimize the damage, or at least I thought I was choosing to minimize damage. Really, I was just choosing to give up. I signed the papers without reading them carefully. I was too tired, too broken, too convinced that it didn't matter anymore. That was 6 months ago, and now I'm sitting in my apartment, not the house, because we sold it, and I used my half of the proceeds to pay off debt and invest in a smaller place. And I'm realizing what I actually signed away. It wasn't just the house. It wasn't just the money. It was my right to fight back. It was my leverage. It was my power. Because in my eagerness to get away from Marcus, I agreed to a no-fault divorce, which meant I agreed to split everything 50-50. Which meant that all the evidence of his affair, all the proof of his betrayal, became legally irrelevant. Which meant that a man who had spent 3 years lying to me and destroying my life walked away with exactly half of everything. The worst part? He's happy. I found out through Linda that he moved in with the other woman. Her name is Stephanie, and she's 10 years younger than me, and they're talking about getting married. He's working a new job. He's building a new life. And I'm here, trying to rebuild mine from the ashes of a choice I made in desperation. Last week, I got a notification that his company had gone public. The consulting firm he'd worked for, the one he'd quit right before I filed for divorce. They'd been acquired by a tech conglomerate, and the deal valued the company at $400 million. Marcus had options, stock options that vested over 4 years. He'd left that company, which meant he'd forfeited most of his options, but not all of them. I did the math with Patricia. He's probably going to make between $800,000 and $2 million from that deal over the next 4 years. Money that I signed away, money that belonged to both of us during the time he earned it, money that I will never see. I'm not going to lie, that realization broke something in me. But here's the thing nobody tells you about hitting bottom. Sometimes you don't stay there. I was having coffee with Linda last Tuesday when she asked me a question that changed everything. "Have you looked at your credit report?" she asked. I hadn't. I'd been so focused on the emotional wreckage that I hadn't paid attention to the financial one. "Why?" I asked. Because Todd was talking to his brother, who's an accountant, and he said something about people hiding assets through credit card debt. Like, if someone wants to make their income look lower, they accumulate debt in someone else's name. I felt something cold slide down my spine. "You don't think—" "I don't know what I think," Linda said, "but I think you should check." So I did, and I found 3 credit cards in my name that I'd never opened. $40,000 in debt across all 3. Accounts that had been opened in the last 6 months. Accounts that showed a pattern of cash advances and wire transfers. Account that Marcus had apparently opened using my information. I called Patricia that same day. "This changes things," she said. When I heard her voice, I realized I'd been right about one thing. I wasn't done fighting yet, not by a long shot. I pulled up the credit report on my laptop that night, sitting in the dark of my bedroom with the blue light burning into my eyes. The 3 accounts stared back at me like accusations. Chase Sapphire, American Express, Discover, $40,000. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to read the account numbers 3 times to make sure they were real. But there they were, cards I'd never seen, opened in June, right around the time Marcus was supposedly at client dinners. I called Patricia at 7 in the morning. She picked up on the second ring like she'd been waiting for this call. "I found something," I said. 3 credit cards, $40,000, all in my name. There was a pause. Then, "Email me everything. Don't touch anything else. And Jennifer, this is good. This is very good." Good. She said it like we'd just found money instead of debt, like fraud was somehow a gift. The next morning, I had an appointment with a forensic accountant Patricia knew. His name was Richard Huang, and his office was in a nondescript building in Midtown that smelled like industrial coffee. He was in his 50s, with reading glasses on a chain, and the manner of someone who'd seen every financial trick in the book and had perfected the art of not being surprised. I brought the credit card statements. I brought my divorce papers. I brought everything. Richard spread it all out on his desk and studied it for 20 minutes without saying anything. Then he looked up at me over his glasses. "These are cash advances," he said, pointing. "Large ones, $5,000, $8,000, $12,000, over a 6-month period." "Where did the money go?" I asked. "That's what we need to find out." He started making calls, to the credit card companies, to the bank, to someone at the IRS who apparently owed him a favor. I sat in his office while he worked, watching him build a picture of my husband's deception like an archaeologist assembling fragments of pottery. By the end of the day, we had a timeline. The accounts were opened online using my social security number and my email address, an email I'd set up years ago but barely used anymore. Marcus had somehow gotten access to it. The first transaction was a cash advance of $5,000, transferred to an account in the name of Marcus Holdings, LLC, a shell company that didn't exist before the divorce filing. "He created a business that doesn't actually do anything," Richard explained, "and he's moving money through it. It's a classic hiding technique. He makes it look like the money disappeared, but really, it's just sitting in an account he controls." "Can we get it back?" I asked. "If we can prove it's fraud, yes, but we need to be careful. Right now, he's committed identity theft and fraud. Those are criminal matters, not just civil ones. Criminal. The word hung in the air between us. That night, I called Marcus for the first time since I'd signed the papers. It went to voicemail. I left a message. "Call me, it's important." He called back 2 hours later. "What?" His voice was cold. "We need to talk about the credit cards." There was a very long silence. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said finally. "The ones you opened in my name. The $40,000 you moved into Marcus Holdings, LLC. Another silence. Then, almost quietly, "You're not supposed to know about that." The words landed like a punch. Not a denial, not an explanation. Just an admission that I'd discovered something he'd hoped I wouldn't find. "I'm calling the police," I said. "If you do that, you're going to regret it," he said. His voice was different now, not cold, dangerous. "I have a lot of things I could say about you, Jennifer. A lot of people I could talk to." "Is that a threat?" "It's a reality check. You want to go nuclear? Fine, but understand what that means." I hung up. The police report was filed the next day. The detective assigned to the case was named Officer Morrison, and he took my statement in a small room that smelled like old coffee and despair. I told him everything. The affair, the divorce, the hidden accounts, the fraud. He took notes. He didn't look shocked. He'd probably seen this 1,000 times before. "We'll investigate," he said. "But I'll be honest with you. These cases are hard to prosecute." He's going to say he was authorized to use your information. He's going to say you knew about it and were covering his business. The burden of proof is pretty high. "But he admitted it," I said. "On the phone. He said I wasn't supposed to know about it." "Do you have a recording?" I didn't. I'd been too shocked to think about recording anything. Officer Morrison didn't say, "I told you so," but his expression said it for him. While the police investigation crawled forward, slower than molasses in January, Patricia filed a motion to modify the divorce settlement. She claimed fraud. She claimed that Marcus had hidden assets and that the original settlement was therefore invalid. Marcus's lawyer, David Rothstein, fought back hard. He claimed that the credit card accounts were a joint business venture, that I'd been fully aware of them, that I was trying to squeeze more money out of Marcus because I was angry about the affair. The judge who'd overseen our divorce was Judge Catherine Morse, a woman in her 60s with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, and the kind of expression that suggested she'd heard every lie both sexes had to offer. Patricia submitted the forensic accounting report. She submitted the police report. She submitted the phone records showing the calls to the credit card companies. And then she did something I hadn't expected. She called me to the stand. I'd never testified in court before. I'd never been in a courtroom, except for the divorce hearing, which had been brief and businesslike. This felt different. This felt like walking into an arena. Patricia led me through the timeline. When had I first noticed the accounts? What had Marcus said when I confronted him? What exactly were his words? He said, "You're not supposed to know about that," I repeated. My voice sounded small in the courtroom. Then David Rothstein stood up for cross-examination. "Mrs. Marcus," he started, and something in the way he said my name made my skin crawl. "Isn't it true that you were angry when your husband ended your marriage?" "Yes," I said carefully. "And isn't it true that you've been trying to take as much of his assets as possible?" "No, I've been trying to—" "Just yes or no, please." I looked at the judge. She nodded for me to answer. "No," I said. "You don't have a recording of this alleged phone call, do you?" "No." "And you have no witnesses to it?" "No." "So essentially, you're asking the court to believe your word against your ex-husband's in a situation where you have every financial incentive to lie." I felt my face go hot. "I'm not lying." "But you can understand how it might appear that way?" Patricia objected. The judge sustained it. But the damage was done. I could see it in the judge's face. She was considering the possibility that I was the bad actor here. That night, I sat in my apartment with Linda and fell apart completely. Not the dignified kind of crying, the kind where you can't catch your breath and your whole body shakes. and you make sounds you didn't know you could make." "I'm going to lose," I said. "He's going to get away with it." "You don't know that," Linda said, holding me. "Yes, I do. I should have recorded the call. I should have done something. I should have—" "You should have what? You're a person, Jenny. You're not supposed to be playing 4D chess with your ex-husband while you're trying to survive." But that's exactly what I was supposed to be doing, apparently, because that's what Marcus had been doing all along. The judge's decision came down 3 weeks later. She ruled that while she had concerns about Marcus's financial practices, there was insufficient evidence to prove fraud beyond a reasonable doubt in a civil context. She modified the settlement by ordering Marcus to pay back the $40,000 and to cover all court costs. But she didn't void the settlement. She didn't give me access to the hidden accounts. She didn't award me the money from the company acquisition. It was a Pyrrhic victory. I'd won something, but it felt like losing. Marcus's lawyer filed an appeal. That's when Richard Huang called me with something else. "I found it," he said, "the real account." He'd been digging deeper, following the money through layers of shell companies and wire transfers, and he'd found where it was actually going. Not Marcus Holdings LLC, something else, something with his girlfriend's name on it, Stephanie Chen, the other woman, the one he was building a new life with. "He's been moving money into accounts in her name," Richard explained, "thousands of dollars a month. It looks like he's been doing it for a while, even before the divorce." I felt something cold settle in my chest. He hadn't just been cheating, he'd been preparing, building an escape route, hiding assets in his girlfriend's name so that when the divorce happened, there would be nothing for me to take. "Can we prove it?" I asked. "We can try, but it's going to require subpoenaing her financial records. It's going to get ugly." Ugly. Everything about this was ugly, but I was done being passive. I was done letting Marcus control the narrative. "Do it," I said. The subpoena was served on Stephanie Chen on a Tuesday afternoon. According to Richard, she showed up at Marcus's apartment in a fury, demanding to know what was going on. Marcus had apparently told her that his ex-wife was a vindictive psycho trying to destroy him. She didn't know about the fraud. She didn't know that the money in her accounts had been stolen from me. When she found out, she did something I didn't expect. She called Patricia's office. The meeting happened in Patricia's conference room. Stephanie showed up with a lawyer of her own, and she brought her financial records. She brought emails. She brought evidence of every transfer Marcus had made into her accounts. And she brought something else, a recording. "He told me the credit cards were legitimate," she said, her face flushed. She was younger than me, maybe mid-30s, with dark hair and the kind of pretty that comes from good genes and expensive skincare. Looking at her made something twist inside me, but I pushed it down. He said they were part of a business plan. He said his ex-wife was trying to take everything from him, and this was the only way to protect himself. "But you're cooperating now," Patricia said carefully. "Because I'm not going to be part of fraud," Stephanie said. Her voice was shaking. "I don't know what kind of person thinks that's okay, but it's not me. I have a career. I have a reputation. I'm not going to let him drag me into this." The recording was of Marcus explaining the scheme to her. His voice, clear and damning, explaining how he'd hidden money, how he'd set up the shell company, how he'd planned the whole thing before the divorce. "I needed insurance," his voice said on the recording. "I needed to make sure she couldn't touch anything." Patricia's expression didn't change, but I saw her hand move slightly, gripping the edge of the table. "This is incredible," she said quietly. The second hearing happened 4 weeks later. This time, Stephanie was there to testify. This time, there was a recording. This time, the judge listened with an expression that went from skeptical to furious. When David Rothstein tried to argue that Stephanie was lying, that she'd been coerced, the judge shut him down. "I've heard the recording, Mr. Rothstein. Unless you're going to argue that your client's voice is somehow a deepfake, I suggest you sit down." This time, the ruling was different. Judge Morse ordered Marcus to return all $40,000 immediately, plus interest. She ordered him to liquidate the shell company and return all assets to the marital estate. She ordered him to pay Patricia's legal fees and the forensic accounting costs. And then she did something else. She referred the case to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. "What Mr. Marcus has done," she said from the bench, "constitutes fraud, identity theft, and potentially money laundering. This court is not equipped to address the criminal aspects of this case, but the district attorney certainly is." Marcus's face went white. The criminal charges were filed 6 weeks later: wire fraud, identity theft, attempted money laundering. The DA was aggressive. They wanted to make an example of him. Marcus hired a criminal defense attorney, a very expensive one. He stopped going to his job. He hired a PR firm. He tried to spin it as a misunderstanding, a miscommunication, a mistake made during a difficult time. Nobody believed him. The case went to trial in November. I testified again, but this time it was different. This time there was physical evidence. There was a recording. There was a cooperating witness. This time I wasn't just a bitter ex-wife. I was a victim. The jury deliberated for 3 days. On the third day, they came back with a guilty verdict on all counts. Marcus was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison. He appealed, but the appeal was denied. He reported to Lompoc Federal Prison in January. The money came back to me slowly through various legal channels. The $40,000 from the credit cards, plus interest and penalties. The assets from the shell company. There was also a civil suit against Stephanie, but her lawyer negotiated a settlement where she returned the money Marcus had transferred into her accounts, nearly $200,000. Between it all, I recovered close to $300,000. It wasn't the $800,000 or $2 million I'd lost in the acquisition, but it was something. It was justice. The first thing I did was buy my apartment outright. No more rent, no more landlord, just mine. The second thing I did was set up a college fund for Emma and Luke. The third thing was harder. I had to forgive myself for the choices I'd made, for signing the papers without reading them carefully, for not fighting harder, for being so broken that I couldn't think straight. Dr. Reeves, my therapist, told me something that stuck with me. "You made the best decision you could with the information you had at the time. That's all any of us can do." I'm not sure I believe that. I think I could have done better. But I'm also learning to live with the person I was in that moment, scared, broken, exhausted, without hating her. Linda threw me a dinner party when the sentencing was finalized. Just a small thing, at her house. She made my favorite pasta. Todd brought wine. We sat on their back porch and watched the sun go down, and for the first time in 2 years, I felt like I could actually breathe. "You did good," Linda said, squeezing my hand. "I got lucky," I said. "If Stephanie hadn't called—" "You did good," she repeated firmly. "You found the fraud. You didn't give up. You fought back." Maybe she's right. Maybe that's what matters. Emma asked me last week why Daddy wasn't coming to her soccer tournament anymore. I told her the truth, in age-appropriate terms, that he made some bad choices, that he's going to have to spend some time thinking about that it wasn't her fault, and it wasn't mine either. She seemed to accept that. Kids are resilient that way. Luke still doesn't fully understand. He just knows Daddy isn't around anymore. I've started taking him to a child therapist to help him process it all, because the one thing I learned from all of this is that you can't heal alone. You need help. You need witnesses. You need people who believe you. I got those things eventually. The moral of this story isn't that nice guys finish last, or that karma always catches up, or any of that. The moral is messier than that. It's that sometimes you make terrible choices. Sometimes you sign away things you shouldn't. Sometimes you're so broken that you can't think straight. But it's also that it's never too late to fight back. That evidence matters. That the truth, even when it takes a while to come out, eventually does. That there are people, forensic accountants, good lawyers, witnesses who suddenly grow a conscience, who will help you if you ask. And that sometimes, if you're very lucky and very persistent, you can take back what was stolen from you. Not all of it, but enough. Enough to rebuild, enough to breathe, enough to know that you were right all along, that something was wrong, even when everyone told you it was fine. 6 months ago, I was signing away my life. Today, I'm rebuilding it on my own terms, and that makes all the difference.